and they've got all that prepared. You should have received, or you should receive an email this week telling you, giving you the details of what you need, and how to connect to the session, so that you can learn about preserving olives and how to preserve olives for later consumption. While we're talking about workshops, does anyone have any more ideas for workshops? So we're looking for ideas for people's thoughts on what might be useful at this time when we're all confined in social isolation. And also, if you have a skill that you think could be valuable to the PSN community, then it doesn't have to be a big skill or something, just a short, we're just sort of looking at a short workshop or a short video of a member or one of our people who will be able to take us through how they do what they do. And that'll be useful for everybody, I think. So, yeah, tonight's talk will be recorded. So if you're not comfortable with being recorded, then we're going to have to ask you to, you can mute, you can stop the video so that you're no longer watching the video. And you can, you can ask questions in the chat room, which will be, Joel will be keeping track of questions in the chat room. But our speaker said that at the end of tonight, there's going to be some time for discussion at the end for questions and answer, and there'll be discussion at the end. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Victoria Walker, who is originally from the field of social psychology, social ecology. She's currently doing a master's at University of Western Sydney, and she's got a long involvement with permaculture, including doing some pruning courses apparently here at PSN quite a number of years ago.
Yeah.
She's going to give us a talk on eco-psychology and culture and the connection between the land that we live on and the world around us and our minds and bodies. So thank you very much, Victoria. And yeah, we'll let you take it away.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, PSN, for having me tonight. And thank you all so much for joining us and being interested in what I'm going to talk about. So we are talking about, I'm just going to have to change my view so that I can see everybody. Hang on a sec. I want to be able to look at everyone. Yep. So just to set the scene of what we're going to be talking about, I've actually got a question straight up for the audience, which is, has anybody heard of the term anthropocentrism before?
Yep.
Yeah? And anyone who has, are they comfortable to, I see Deb is giving a thumbs up. Are you comfortable to say what, to say that to everybody else? You need to unmute yourself. Yep.
It's a focus around, anthropocentric is when the focus is about man, anthrocentric.
Perfect. Did you want to add something?
No.
No, great. That's perfect. It's basically a worldview where we put human beings in the middle and everything else in the entire world is arranged around us for our disposal, our use, and that is seen as the natural order of things. And because I'm a bit of a visual person, I imagine it in my mind of like human beings in the middle, and then everything else, all animals, rocks, rivers, mountains, air, soil, everything else is arranged around us. And the idea is that we have the permission to be able to use those things and do whatever we want with those things as it suits us. And we are really told that that is the natural order of how things are and how things should be. So they also talk about the Anthropocene era, which is closely connected to this idea of anthropocentric. And the idea of that is, it's an era in time. I'm sure you're all aware of the different eras that we have. And the Anthropocene is an era where humans have impacted the natural world to such an extent that the systems are no longer recognizable in the way that they used to be. So the impact of man on the earth and on the earth's systems is absolutely vast, and to the point that we are in a new era of measurement of culture and society and development, okay? So bringing me to eco-psychology. So the word eco actually means home. And psyche is about our psyche, it's about our awareness, our mind, our soul, if you will. And so eco-psychology is really about how we relate to our home. Okay? It's not only about the ecology. And embedded in the idea of this is that our wellness, I hate that word, but you know what I mean, our well-being is reliant on us being able to live in healthy functioning environments. And that if we are not living in healthy functioning environments, that impacts the way that we exist in society and with each other and with relation to ourselves, okay? So I live in the Blue Mountains. I've chosen to live in the Blue Mountains. I've been here for a couple of years and I'm very attracted to this area because I love the ecology here. I live in a national park. We're surrounded by lots of really tall trees. There's lots of water in the landscape. It's not a dry landscape. It's very lush, ferns and, you know, all of these kinds of things. And for some reason, that kind of landscape really attracts me and really appeals to me. Whereas I would not feel comfortable if I lived in a desert kind of landscape, or if I lived in a sort of really open, treeless rural landscape. They don't seem like comfortable kinds of landscapes to me. So it's a deliberate choice, okay? So I invite you now to have a think about your ecology, your home. What are the things that you see when you look outside your window, when you walk down the street, when you look over into your neighbour's yard, and how that impacts the experience that you have, and your mental frame of mind and your emotional frame of mind. And I want you to think for a second how different your day-to-day experience might be if you lived in a high altitude desert, or if you lived next to an enormous river that froze in the winter and thawed out in the summer, or if you lived in a really, really, really deep valley where the sun never entered. It really impacts the way that we feel, and how we feel about what we see impacts, you know, our mental landscape, our emotional landscape, our spiritual landscape, and all these kinds of things. So I'm just wondering if anybody would like to speak just briefly about the relationship that they feel that they have with the natural area that they live in. Don't be shy. Joel, yeah?
I just wanted to say that living in this part of Sydney where PSN is kind of based, we're really fortunate to be in one of the greenest areas of Sydney. So there is so many bush tracks around, and it's just so fortunate. It really, for me, when you said where do you feel at home, it's really walking through the forest. It feels like home. It almost feels like I'm going to church in a way when I walk through there, when the sun's rising and everything's really quiet. It really is a special feeling.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I'm really familiar with the area of where PSN operates because my parents live at Dural and I grew up in that area. So I know that you have lots of big mature trees, and in lots of the streets the houses are set quite far back, so you have big yards and it's quite foresty, it's very lush, and that brings bird life. And it's a very, very different kind of experience to, say, in Western Sydney, where they don't have big trees. They don't have hardly any trees at all, and that changes the climate, but it also changes people's mood and how people feel within themselves and how people relate to each other and respond to each other. So it really has a very big impact on framing your day-to-day experience. So if we think back, or not think back, but imagine back to pre-industrialized society, before, you know, machines did all the work, and when it was all just animal labor and human labor, before cities. So people generally lived in either agricultural-based societies, I think they're called agrarian societies, or they lived in indigenous, probably nomadic types of societies. Broad brushstrokes here, okay? But in those kinds of societies, the relationship that, like, people, their entire lives and their entire existence was embedded in nature in one way or another. And it was in a couple of ways. So the functional relationship that you have with nature, how you build your house, how you get your food, how you get your water, understanding the seasons, the soil, the, you know, all the systems that you're living within, the animals. That was survival information. That was what people absolutely needed to know, or their society would not be able to survive, or that family or that individual would not be able to survive if they did not understand the nature that they were surrounded by. But because it was such an important part of survival, it also found its way into culture and into cultural information and how people would communicate with each other. So knowledge, that survival information moved into songs that people would sing, stories that they would tell, rhymes that they would have, celebrations and rituals, and all of the cultural elements of things were really embedded within those natural systems too. Is this all kind of making sense to people? Yeah, great. So the relationship that people had with nature gave them, it was a functional survival relationship, but there was also a sense of an orientation, a sense of order. Be it, you can see it as a spiritual sense of order, but just of how things actually work. What is the role of man among all of the other things that are sharing this environment as well? As opposed to this anthropocentric, there's us and there's everything else. It was much more a part of things were interwoven and related to each other. So I'd love to just read you a quote now from Carl Jung, and it is from a really great essay about eco-psychology that I can share the name of if people are interested later. So this is Carl Jung. Scientific understanding has grown, so our world has become dehumanized. Man feels himself isolated in the cosmos because he is no longer involved in nature and has lost his emotional, unconscious identity with natural phenomena. These have slowly lost their symbolic implications. No voices now speak to man from stones, plants, and animals, nor does he speak to them, believing that they can hear. His contact with nature has gone, and with it has gone the profound emotional energy that this symbolic connection provided. So this is a comment on a psychological and spiritual grounding in nature, as well as functional and survival-based. And it's quite easy for members of Western culture to feel that, in response to Mikey's question, I think that's actually about 45 years ago. I've got an idea in my head that was from 1975. So it is rather old. But like totally valid, you know, even 45 years ago, we were still in a really similar kind of situation. Yeah, so it is easy to feel as Western people that having a relationship like that is not our realm. That's the realm of Indigenous cultures. They're the ones that are really close to nature, and it's easy to feel kind of a bit left out or a bit inferior in that way, because yeah, well, you know, it's so much more obvious, the Indigenous embeddedness in the nature. So I want to read you another quote, and this is from Huckleberry Finn, the book, the novel. And that novel was written in about 1850, and it's in very early colonial America. And in this book, Huck Finn is sitting in a room by himself. I sat down in a chair and tried to think of something cheerful, but it weren't no use. I felt so lonesome, I most wished I was dead. The stars were shining and the leaves rustled in the woods, ever so mournful. And I heard an owl away off, woo-wooing about somebody that was dead, and a whippoorwill and a dog crying about somebody who was going to die. And the wind was trying to whisper something to me, and I couldn't make out what it was. And so it made the cold shivers run over me. Then away out in the woods, I heard the kind of sound that a ghost makes when it wants to tell about something that's on its mind and can't make itself understood, so can't rest easy in its grave and has to go about that way every night grieving. I got so downhearted and scared. I did wish I had some company. So the reason I wanted to share that with you is to demonstrate that this is, it's part of our white history too. And it's having a connection with nature is not something that needs to be foreign to people from westernized cultures. We don't need to be locked out of this process. It's very much a part of our heritage identity. And something that I like about that quote is that he was in dialogue with nature. He was sitting there and he was listening and reading and understanding these messages that were existing in nature, but they were relating to him and they were giving information to him, okay? So in the field of permaculture, we generally sit in the position of managing nature. Like it's this fantastic craft, permaculture, where my understanding of it is that we understand and can use natural elements and natural systems to provide for our material needs to help us survive. And so I kind of imagine the permaculturist is like a little mini god, and he can play with all the elements in the garden and in the house to create the kind of outcomes that we're looking for. But there's another side to this relationship, thinking about it as a reciprocal relationship, and it's one of listening, observing, absorbing, connecting. And my favourite permaculture principle was always observe and interact. And that was mainly because it helped me realise that we don't do that much. Like, we're always doing. We're not sitting back and absorbing and observing. And that is something that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention tonight in this context of EcoPsychology, the receiving, yeah, energetically, allowing ourselves to be impacted by what is happening in the natural world. Okay. So EcoPsychology it's a very Western concept, and it was created in response to the disconnection from nature that is happening, you know, very, very broadly. So in this lens of EcoPsychology and thinking about us and belonging in the universe and everything, we are the dominant species. We are pretty much alone in the universe in a way. We are dominating, but we do not have kin. All of these animals and plants and elements are inferior to us. They're not our brothers and sisters. Okay? And so according to this EcoPsychology, this disconnection and this loneliness creates a gap in us like a wound or a void that used to be filled with our relationship with nature and all the natural elements. And according to this way of looking at things, we have this void that we are always trying to fill with all of these other things. And there is, I suppose, lots of ideas about what that void is all about. But in eco-psychology, it is about our severed relationship with the natural world. And so us wanting to have and have and have and have and have, you know, so many things, the greedy, the consuming, is related to this gap that is created, a lack of meaning, a lack of connection because of our severance from the natural world. This is part of the eco-psychology theory. So we experience a lack of meaning and a lack of connection, and that is what is feeding this insatiable desire to consume and consume. So in a very simplified way, the Indigenous perspective is that we belong to the land. The Western perspective is that the land belongs to us. And the Judeo-Christian perspective is that God has given us the land and we can do what we like with it. And that is his divine will, that we can do whatever we want. Okay? And inherent kind of in that, if you combine that worldview with our capitalist society and, you know, economic models and all of that, it is our God-given right to destroy nature for profit. This is the assumption that so much of our society is actually based on. It is the natural order that we have the right to destroy nature for profit. And so I would suggest that so many of our problems that we are experiencing now are actually problems of perspective. If we had a different perspective, maybe we wouldn't be experiencing these problems too. So, and this is another, just a little short quote that I want to read by Andy Fisher. And he's one of the biggest writers in eco-psychology. So he says, modern society is in an extreme pathological state of rupture from the reality of the natural world, as is indicated on a daily basis by the ecological crisis. There is, moreover, little public recognition that this crisis is indeed a psychological one. So, thinking about the natural, the sort of the biological order of the world, forgetting all this stuff of like humans are you know, we can destroy everything that we want, blah blah blah. If you think about us actually in a state of cooperation with nature, how do we as permaculturists, and I'd love a couple of voices if anyone's got anything to say, how do we as permaculturists locate ourselves biologically within the natural order?
I was wondering if you could rephrase it for me, because I'm a bit lost on thinking of an answer.
Okay, cool, great. So how do we, as practices of permaculture, how do we see ourselves as being a part of the natural world? Or some practices or some things that you do in the field of permaculture that are located in, that are sort of in harmony with the natural world?
Well, we do try to use nature rather than moulding nature. And I think Stephanie might have been speaking, but she hasn't unmuted. Were you speaking, Stephanie?
Me.
There you go.
I can hear you now. Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Cecilia.
Okay. All right. I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, I agree that, you know, we actually work with nature.
Yeah.
You know, we're not imposing ourselves on nature. We have to work with the system, you know, with the systems.
Absolutely.
I think that's what we do. That's part of permaculture, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. Have you got any, can you give us one or two actual examples of something that you might do on your site?
Well, you know, even just checking the veggies.
Yep.
And seeing what's going on with those, you know, looking at what's eating them and what's eating them, and you know, the needs of the veggie plants, if they're in the right place as far as the sun's concerned, as far as the wind's concerned, all those sort of things that come into play when you're just looking at your green veggies and you know, checking out how they're actually functioning or being at their best because of you taking into account the different aspects that are involved in their in them doing their best. You have to look at all those different things, you know.
Absolutely. And I think that permaculture is very much located within the natural order and the biological order, and that's one of the underpinnings really of the whole approach. It's not like there's a bit of manipulating nature, but a lot of it is about you know, understanding the boundaries of what is possible and what is actually going on there, and then maneuvering within that. And the idea of wanting to clean water, you know, before it leaves your site, and nourish the soil, and all of these kinds of things is about the individual locating themselves in a biological way in the world in a very real and realistic manner. Was someone starting to speak then? Tong? Yeah.
I'm just thinking with my site is a sloping down sort of backyard.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to recycle my water from kitchen and bathroom later on. I just have the plan. This is a plan in my mind, trying to use the water, just let it naturally flow down to the backyard, to my veggie patch or fruit trees.
Yes.
Is that a good example?
Excellent. Yes. It's using gravity and it's
yeah.
Yes, precisely. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to attract the birds because we at the very back there is a creek, and it is part of the dense park, like a little forest. There are a lot of birds, and they need food, and they come to our balconies and knocking on the windows sometimes.
Right.
So I want to combat that. I want to attract more birds. I want to use the material in the backyard as well, because when I dig the garden, there are a lot of rocks. My internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me well? Okay. I want to use the rocks. Yeah, use the rocks to make some flat platforms for people to have a rest on, and also to use the rocks to like set up a area for banana trees, and just to make use of the rocks. Yeah.
Great. And what popped into my mind when you were saying that is you're wanting to make, you know, you're wanting to attract birds and support birds, but you're wanting to make places where humans can rest. And that, in my mind, like in this whole headspace that we're in now, it's like humans are part of the environment too. And they are elements within the environment, just as you'd provide for a bird, you're providing for a human too. Yeah?
Yeah, just want to implement each element and let them coordinate with each other and make use of the sun energy and the air, the site.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Tong. And Cecilia had your hand up.
I was just thinking how we use closed systems, and we do our best to keep resources on site and make the most use of each one, you know, through a process of well, making sure that we do use as much as we can. I also like attracting insects.
Yeah, great. And the closed systems are a perfect example, and they are mirrored on natural systems. It's looking at natural systems and going, they're closed systems, they work, they've been going for hundreds of thousands of years or whatever, and how can we use the things that we're seeing to create these systems ourselves? So I would thank you for your answers, everyone. That's really great. I would argue that permaculturists are very good at locating themselves biologically within the natural systems. And to kind of deepen and expand on this concept, so EcoPsychology takes this to a whole new level, and it invites us to see our whole selves, not just our biological selves, our needs and our outputs and our inputs, but our whole selves within the biological order and within the natural world. Our fears, our dreams, our moods, our suffering, our joy, our connections, our relationships, all of those things, it invites us to encompass all of that within the natural order too. So the same natural order that creates storms and weather patterns and tides and all of these different kinds of elements and energy, we can try to think of ourselves and our own rhythms and moods and highs and lows and energy and no energy and all of these things, seeing those as located within the natural biological order as well. And I know it's a bit of a mental stretch, like this is not how we normally think, but I love it. You know, I think it's a very beautiful way of seeing. So does anybody have anything to contribute here to the question, what would it look like if you were located within the natural order in this way? Does anybody have anything to offer there, or is it that a bit too deep?
This is a little bit superficial, Victoria.
Okay. That's okay.
In the olden days, before you knew what the weather was going to be every hour for the next 7 days, you actually had to, if the weather came into what your life was planned to be, like washing out or going on a picnic or something, you actually had to work out what the weather was going to be yourself, just on the indications, like the feeling in the air.
Right. Yes.
And I mean, there are other things like what beetles were doing and you know what spiders and ants and things were doing, but the main thing was actually standing outside and feeling the atmosphere.
Yes.
I don't know what it is that you feel, but it could be the barometric pressure. I don't know, but people actually sort of prided themselves on knowing that it was going to rain in the afternoon from a blue sky sort of thing. Well, you know, that stuff nobody thinks about that anymore. You know, you don't ever, as far as I know, no one actually does that. They go to their phone and check the weather forecast for the next hour or, you know, hourly up to the next 7 days or something, and it's usually quite right. So, I mean, that's just one little example. But no,
that's a great example. Thank you so much. So some things that I came up with on that, just some suggestions, like our mood and our behaviour being affected by the seasons and the weather. Our habits affected by the seasons. Having an awareness of moon cycles and tides and menstrual cycles and the connections between those and how they affect either your mood or the mood of someone that you might live with. And being aware of bird migrations and animal migrations and how that might affect the bird and animal migrations in your area, and that being connected to a sense of rhythm and a marker in time. Oh, there's those ducks coming through again. That's this time, and that reminds me of then, and all of these sorts of things. There's been some really nice things on the chat. I'm just going to read those out. So Joel said, I see it as a great quest to find our role in this grand system. We are not passive observers, nor are we in control. We are taking part in a dance. This is this reciprocal. Love it. Thank you, Joel. And Sel said, a partnership in harmony, nature and people working together. Exactly. Beautiful. And Cecilia, I think I'd use fewer resources if I were more in touch with nature. That's a really good reflection and interest, and something that you can revisit, later and think about. Okay. So the first time that I experienced this, this idea, was staying in a house sitting for someone who was very into permaculture, who lived in Blackheath, up here in the Blue Mountains, and who used her house in a particular way because of the sun. And she bought a house that was laid out in a particular way, but where she'd sit at what times of day and what seasons, and the sun's going down, so you put all the blinds down and to trap the heat and all of these. I'd never really lived like that before, but it was I thought it was actually quite lovely. And it's about building the awareness of all of the natural stuff into how you behave and how you use a space, and how you act within that space. So that was really interesting. So I want to drop in another little concept, and then we're going to watch a little short video clip, which is really lovely. So coming back to this idea of a reciprocal relationship. And that is the potential for human beings using their attention and their energy and a sense of intention to attempt to heal spaces. And so there's this movement called Radical Joy for Hard Times, that I think has started in America. And what this movement is about is people, generally in small groups, going to damaged natural areas. So they've been somehow compromised or damaged. And people deliberately going into these spaces with the intention to bring good energy and to heal these places with their energy and their attention. So they might meditate, they might sing, they might create art, they might decorate the space, somehow, or something. But the idea behind it is that their energy can be embedded into this place, and they can give love from their human bodies to these natural places to assist them to heal. And I think that's pretty kooky. I'm not sure whether I believe in it or not. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Depends what kind of mood I'm in. But as a concept, I think it's very lovely. And on that note, I'd love to, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to share a little short video clip with you all that illustrates this in another way. So just bear with me for... Is that going to work?
We're at the foot of our mother mountain, Willoughby. We gathered here for a big bunai, what we call a corroboree. And it's one of the first biggest dances we held here on country for over 150 years. Today was about healing land, healing country, healing spirit and healing people.
As soon as this call out happened, if you know who you are, we understand our identity, there is no question but to answer that call and come out here and stomp for our mother. And it's just basically following suit of all our teachers, all our knowledge holders, and looking after our old people and ancestors. The tradition has never been lost, the protocols have never been lost, the law is all the same and it still exists within the land.
When I dance, I feel my old people and I listen to the beats and mother's heartbeat. And it just brings healing to me and strengthens me. And I know if I'm feeling that, then everyone there with us is feeling the same.
For me, dance is just, it's like you're just free, you're just out there, you're just free. You're feeling the dirt, you're feeling the earth, you're just loving it. You're just dancing on your mother's country.
Our old people have been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. It's a continuation, of building our identities and strengthening our young ones. This is what we need as Aboriginal people to keep us going and to keep us strong.
Where we're at now is a very good place of healing and strength. And for our non-Indigenous brothers to come along and see how powerful we are and support us and learn from us, we're breaking down barriers.
Seeing all Yuin people come together was one of the most beautiful moments I've ever seen. The land's sick at the moment, so our people are sick. And if we can come together and dance together and not only heal our own spirits, the spirits in the land and our ancestors, but we can do it for the whole community. That's the true meaning behind our culture.
So that was a really beautiful illustration of this reciprocal relationship, that those people gathering are for the purpose of healing the land, but they also acknowledge that if the land is sick, that they are sick, and so that connecting with the land gives them strength, which gives strength to the land as well. It's just so powerful and so beautiful. And something that I noticed when I was just watching this today was that, sorry, where am I? That in these ceremonies, they're connecting to nature using elements of rhythm, using their body, using vibration, the voice, colour, wearing natural elements on their face and on their body. Like, it's almost that they transcend their humanness and become a part of nature, the way that they've decided to use their form and their voices and their bodies. So it's really powerful and really lovely. Does anybody have anything that they would like to contribute or say on that before we move on to another element? No, there's a lot of people I can't see, so I don't know if anyone's hand's up there. But no, we're happy to move on then. All right. So,
Hi, Victoria.
Sure. Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm just thinking efficiency. When you talk about that, I have efficiency in my mind. I'm thinking about the best way to use the resources that the land has provided to human, either the element of sunshine or the element of bush or the element of water, rain, etc. What's the best efficient way to make the most of everything, and also to reward everything out of your own effort?
Great. Yeah, that's sounding very cooperative. It's sounding like a cooperative relationship that you're seeking. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm seeking good design, like what's the best way to use this patch of soil, or the best way to make the most of the sunshine in this area, those kind of elements. But that's what I'm trying to achieve, but I find it's hard. It's needed a lot of knowledge and experience.
And and patience and trial and error, you know.
Yeah.
For sure. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to shift just slightly, and I want to introduce this concept of the ecological self. So what the ecological self is it's just a term really, but it embeds really beautifully into all these other things that we've been talking about. And it's basically the human, the person, as just another element of nature. Not in dominion of it, but a feeling, it's being equal, not necessarily seeing oneself as having a different value, which is kind of the normal way. It's like the human's here and everything else is down there. But when people are experiencing their ecological self, it's a state of being equal to and very much embedded in a natural environment. It can involve, like in the dancing that we just saw, letting go of our sense of humanness and our sense of separateness, and just being at one with everything. Has anybody ever felt that way? And can you describe what that was like? A feeling of what? Joel, do you want to speak?
Hi. Yeah. I can share that I've had that feeling before, and it's often been in a natural area, like doing a hike, where it just feels like any concept I had of myself just kind of dissolves away, and you just really feel like, you know, there's the tree there, I'm here, there's no real difference between me and the tree. Or sometimes you'll see an animal walking, and then they're looking at you, you're looking at them, and you kind of have this almost realization that you're having the same experience of living, but just reflected through a different mechanism or something like that.
And was that an enjoyable feeling?
Yeah, I think it was. It felt, again, it's I think it is quite a beautiful feeling and it's possibly the opposite of loneliness, I would say. It's
that feeling of the kinship, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that it's very beautiful, and we all have the capacity to reach those states if we choose to, we want to. And so a couple of words that I wrote down about what that sort of can feel like, just like Joel said, a oneness, a connection, a sense of equality, And also it can involve a realization of our codependence. I think that humans like to walk around going, oh, you know, we're the best. But the fact is that we actually need, you know, we need clean air, we need clean water, we need clean food. We are dependent. And so sometimes when you can tap into that sort of the ecological self, as they call it, it can also come with a realization of our dependence on nature and on these systems, and it can sometimes be quite a humbling experience. So it's something to think about and really think about. I'm sure that everyone has actually had an experience like that at some point, but it might not be coming to mind straight away. Yeah, Mikey?
Right, yeah, I used to, about 20 years ago, I worked in PNG in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
And these guys, they'd set off for a 3-day walk up and down hills and valleys that are impassable by car or any other means. You wouldn't even be able to take a horse, I don't think. But they just set off walking for 3 days at a pop with a fire stick in their hand, and that's it.
Yep.
So they'd basically put that in their pocket and just walk off and expect to get where they were going and rely on nature to provide them food, water, shelter, you know, just lying down in the bush, make themselves a little shelter and lie down in the bush for the night and carry on walking in the morning. And I just, that really, it still inspires me today. I was talking to my son this morning about it. And I'd love to get to the point where I felt like I could do that.
Yep.
Once in my life.
And it made you recognize your dependence, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they didn't have that. Yeah,
correct.
Amazing. Wow. Cecilia, did you want to say something too? You're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I'd clicked. I'm here. In nature, well, I used to row in 4s and 8s, and you're very dependent on everyone cooperating. And there were times when I would describe it as the boat was singing. Everybody was perfectly in time and the feel was fantastic. So that sort of connection with everybody else while doing your own bit, and you're on the water and you're in nature, and yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow, that must feel like flying almost.
It was 30 years ago. I don't think I could do it now.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Thank you both. And it's actually funny, Mikey, that you gave that example, because I wanted to read another little quote from a book called My Year Without Matches by an author called Claire Dunn. And her situation is that she was a professional wildlife campaigner, so a professional environmentalist in a job protecting nature, but she had gotten to a point where she was so exhausted and burnt out by the lifestyle that she had to stop what she was doing. And what she did is she joined this really small program where 6 people went out and lived for 12 months on a piece of bush and had to make their own shelter. They had to learn how to hunt. They were skinning animals. They were making their own crockery, and you know, all of these wildlife skills, and making fire without any matches. And she has this experience sort of towards the end where she goes off on just what what you were referring to, Mikey, like a bit of a vision quest where you go off into the bush, and she took a sweet potato with her, and that was what she took. And she had this little tool for a little spindle thing for making fire, and that's all she took with her for 3 days. And she was walking through the forest, and she was on her own, and she ended up on this high place, and a really rare bird came down, and she had this moment, this ecological awareness moment where the bird stopped and looked into her eyes, and she looked back at the bird and she felt this connection. And this is what she's writing about in this quote. In that moment, I am neither myself nor the bird, but both. I am the white-winged bird, the woman here and now, and the one from 6 months ago. I am the rock I sit on, the valley below, and the sky above. I am scorpion and crow and fire and moon. I am as eternal and timeless as the mountain range itself, the molten fires that push them upwards, and the dreaming that created them. In that second, I understand that rather than sharing an interaction, the bird and I are part of one coordinated action, one continuous dance happening not between us, but through us. We are expressions of a planet that is alive and responsive, a sentient universe dreaming itself into being moment by moment, every moment both spontaneous and perfectly choreographed. Incredibly beautifully put. She's a very lovely writer. I might actually put that in the chat box because it's a book that I really, really recommend. And I think she's actually written a new one. Just bear with me while I write that. And a really lovely book to experience. So I do recommend that just as a novel. Just give me one, could you just excuse me for 1 second? Can you turn that down a little bit, honey? Can you turn that down a little bit? Okay, sorry about that. Great, so I want to just touch on the concept of ecological grief, which is something that has probably been around for a very long time, but very recently has become something with a name, and basically what it is about feelings of loss and grief that human beings experience in response to damage and loss in the natural world. It's something that I've experienced for a lot of my life and never really knew what it was or why it didn't seem to affect anybody else. It just seemed to affect me very much, but now it's something that a lot of people are talking about. And I would describe it as an embodied response to the loss of nature. So grief isn't something that just happens in your mind. It happens in your cells, really, like a deep sense of loss. And yeah. So I would argue that it's a very healthy and very normal response to ecological destruction. I would go far as to say that it is the only healthy normal response, actually, because we are so connected and dependent. And the fact that a lot of us don't experience this or suppress this is evidence of an unhealthy relationship with nature. Not to put that on the individual, I'm talking about at a societal level. And so Joanna Macy is someone who has been writing about this kind of stuff for about 40 years. She was very much before her time. She's very, very switched on. And she sees ecological grief as evidence of our connection to nature. So it's not like that you're weak or that you're soft or that you're very sensitive or whatever. It's like the damage that occurs in the broader natural world is damage to us human beings, and it is felt in that way by many of us. And I'm going to read a quote from one of Joanna Macy's books. She's written lots of really amazing books, but this just encapsulates it so perfectly. Feeling pain for the world is as natural to us as the food and air we draw upon. We are not closed off from this world, but integral components of it. That pain is the price of consciousness in a threatened and suffering world. It is not only natural, It is an absolutely necessary component of our collective healing. The pain has a purpose. It's a warning signal designed to trigger remedial action. The problem, therefore, lies not with our pain for the world, but in our repression of it. I'll just tap into some of the comments. Stress and grief are physiological things too. Our emotions are deeply connected with our physical selves, and our bodies respond to the stresses around us of environment and society. Absolutely. We don't have to be conscious of these stresses to react to them. And climate grief is an important message. Yes, yes, yes. So Joanna Macy's most recent book is in your library. And it's a really, really, really crucial and very interesting and important book that I am a big fan of too. So I recommend if you get the opportunity to check it out. And if we ever wanted to gather again in this way, we can delve a bit more into some of Joanna Macy's stuff, because she's got some really incredible work. I'd love if anybody is willing to speak just briefly, if anybody here has experienced feeling ecological grief and what that has been like for them.
Yeah, I used to work in the mining industry as a geologist.
Yep.
And basically the open cut mining for uranium, well, sorry, not open cut for uranium. That was the most ecologically friendly mine I've ever been on. But the manganese are just ripping square kilometres of the earth up in Groot Island, up in Darwin. And it just sent me on a really downward spiral. Like you're seeing that every day. Like they go on about the environment and trying to save it, and they've got an environmental department, but basically all the environmental department is there to do is pass the government controls on what they are and aren't allowed to do. They're always going to rip it up. They never not rip it up, just no matter what the reason for. If the environmental people have got a good reason for not ripping it up, that always goes in the bin if the government will let them do it.
Yeah.
So it's really over a period of time, it really starts to grind you down.
Yeah.
So I couldn't wait to get out of it at the end. I don't do that anymore.
Did anybody ever talk about it in your work?
No, I was going to say before, they hide, they just suppress their personal feelings for spouting the company values and the company ethic just to earn a dollar, basically.
Yeah.
If anyone's came out with something about it, they'd that's the end of your career, basically. You just stall and you wouldn't get promoted or anything. So yeah, nothing would happen.
Very unwelcome. A concept that's just really unwelcome in that space, because you can't exist in both spaces. You really can't. You can't have environmental sensitivity and ethics and be doing that, so that's where the conflict came in for you, and probably a lot of the other people involved in that are having to, as a survival mechanism, suppress that part of themselves because they cannot do both without driving themselves crazy. So
well, it does drive you crazy whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Thanks, Mikey. Anybody else have anything they want to offer? I'm seeing some messages. We all felt ecological grief last summer with the bushfires. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Definitely. And that was a time when it became, it was a very collective thing. I feel like the whole country was feeling that. It didn't matter what your political views were or whatever, but it was torture for all of us. Yeah. So the last little bit that I want to just bring to this conversation is And actually, that was another perfect segue, Mikey, thank you. So to inflict damage on the natural world in the way of the mining industry or other types of damaging industries, we have to believe that we're separate from it. Because you can't do those kind of things if you really believe that you're connected, because it's like you're cutting off your own arm, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. So where did this idea of being separate come from? Okay, so I want to introduce just two concepts. So in the 1600s was a French philosopher, scientist, and mathematician whose name was Descartes. And we'll look at those messages a bit later, thank you. But Descartes was a very smart guy, and he did all of these very interesting things. But he came up with this idea of breaking complex things down into smaller parts and looking at the parts, okay? Looking at the parts instead of the whole. And the idea was, if you understand all of those little separate parts, then you will understand the whole. Okay. And so in terms of human development and civilization and etc., that has actually brought huge developments to the course of humanity. And it really, in my perspective, it brought this idea of specialization. You might be you're a heart surgeon. That's all you do. And you spend your entire life learning how to be a heart surgeon and becoming really, really good at being a heart surgeon. But that's all that you do. Or you might study a particular kind of beetle, you know, and that's all that you do. So it's this compartmentalization of complex things, okay? And it essentially like sees things as separate to each other. So one thing that idea does as well, of like, if you understand all the separate little parts of a car, then you will understand a car. It takes away an element of magic or mysticalness. It's like anything, no matter how complicated or amazing, is just a whole lot of separate little parts that have been put together, okay? So this idea of compartmentalization. So the reason that I'm bringing this up, and the way that I think it has impacted the environmental kind of sphere, is that it gives us the ability, actually someone wrote the mechanical mind, is looking at everything with a mechanical mind. And it gives us the ability to separate things in our mind that we don't want to have to think about. So it might mean that I go to Kmart and I buy a really cheap t-shirt that's made in Bangladesh. But I choose not to think about those Bangladeshi workers. And I choose not to acknowledge that my buying that t-shirt has contributed to the situation and contributed to that system. Okay, because it's inconvenient. I don't want to think about that. And according to our modern way of thinking, I don't have to think about that. That has nothing to do with me. All I'm doing is buying a t-shirt. Okay, or eating meat from the supermarket, which I do. So I'm not saying this in a preachy way. Okay, but that I'm seeing this piece of steak. And all I see is a piece of steak that I'm going to take home and cook for my dinner. I don't see an animal that has lived in particular conditions and been afraid and maybe been distressed living in those unhealthy conditions, or a worker who works there who is emotionally scarred by their job, but that's all they can do. And you know, like all of those things that are part of a broader situation, this compartmentalization enables us to just close them off. And I think that has a lot to do with the environmental crisis and all the ways that we're kind of going wrong as a society. So as another flip side to that idea of everything's broken up into small parts, I'll go into the chat actually, because there were some really relevant things in there. The mechanical mind separates us from the oneness of the universe. So much of science and medicine is proving to be false, such as the revolution of epigenetics on medicine. I can't keep up with all of these. Reductionism, which, yeah, and it's lacking synergy. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Because this second thing that I just wanted to bring in just before we close off was in the 1970s, and James Lovelock with his Gaia theory, okay, which is the absolute opposite of this reductionism, compartmentalization. And so this Gaia theory is basically that the world is a coherent, conscious organism in itself. It is multi-species and multi-systemic, but in all of the many parts of it is a coherent whole that has a degree of consciousness to it. And it has the ability to respond to shocks and to heal itself using its own natural intelligence, which is a really, really beautiful concept. And I want just to go back to this idea of ecological grief and it being a warning signal. If we look at the world through this lens of the Gaia theory and the ecological self, so we are parts of nature, you know, interacting and cooperating with all of the other parts of nature. So us feeling that sense of pain or distress or loss can be seen as us as part of that broader system, and we're humans, we're intelligent, we have capacity to do things, and we have capacity to step in and protect the nature that we're a part of. So in this Gaia theory concept, this pain can be seen as the living world communicating to us and asking us to act on its behalf. Does that make sense? Kinda. So just another really, really short quote just to finish it off, and then we can open up the floor for a bit of chatting. The wild without and the wild within are as reciprocal as reflections on water.
Could you say that one again for me to let it sink in?
Yeah, the wild without and the wild within are as reciprocal as reflections on water. As within, so without. So thank you so much for your attention and time. It's been a huge pleasure bringing this to you. And we've got, like, it's nearly 20 past, but I'd love to hear some thoughts and some reflections from people. If you've got anything that you want to. The last quote, I'm not sure, but I can find it. It was within a bigger book, so I'll find that. We're going to send through just some of the references and stuff, so people can, if that really appealed, people can find. Yeah. So does anybody have anything that they want to add, or a question or a comment? Thanks for all those chat messages.
Can I just step in for a second?
Please.
Joel, can you just switch the thing over?
Oh, you've muted everyone. Have you?
I don't know. I'm not muted.
What would you like me to switch over?
Can I get the focus video for a second? Just
yes.
While
yeah.
people are thinking, give people a bit of chance to think of questions.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Victoria, for that. That was really helpful, I think, for all of us. And yeah, as Sue just said, I think good food for thought. So yeah, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. And yeah, I'm sure that if we wanted to discuss it with you in future, then yeah, you'd be more than welcome to come along to one of our meetings, whether or not they're in person or not. So, yeah. Okay, so we'll go back to Victoria. Does anybody have questions for Victoria? Have you managed to think of something in the time that I've natted on?
Victoria, how do we cope with that grief?
Oh, that's another, that'd be another presentation. Okay, in a nutshell, allowing it and respecting it, and recognizing it as it was Joanna Macy saying, recognizing it as part of the complex relationship that you have with nature. So I think that a way that it sort of helped for me is to consider, like what we've been talking about tonight, the enormity and the complexity of our human nature relationships, and that the grief and the loss is just one part of that complex relationship. It can't be that nature is just a source of pain for us. If we are someone who feels deeply enough to feel that, then you can recognize that you do have a relationship with nature, and so to be able to get the good parts of that as well. So being in nature and loving nature and generating relationships with place. And particular places and particular elements is part of it. Action and doing stuff, doing something about it is definitely part of it. But like what I see and what worries me is that sometimes people see action and activism as an antidote to the grief, and it is, but that's only part of the solution. So when you go into your activism and your action coming from a place of distress, it can create other problems, basically. And that's what I have done. I'm saying this from experience because I came into environmentalism from a damaged and troubled, perspective, because I was distressed myself and I have suffered a lot. And so there's a lot of healing and thinking that needs to go into that, healing, into that as well, into the healing of the grief. I just saw a comment, sharing your knowledge so that other people are inspired to deepen their relationship with nature. Yeah, becoming a cheerleader for nature. But what can be the problem sometimes is a sense of attachment. And a lot of us can go into activism and environmental action from a place of attachment. So that's something that also needs work. So it's actually quite a complex question with complex answers. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, Victoria. Quick question. I was wondering, this concept of the work that reconnects, which we've spoken about before. I was wondering if you could maybe introduce that a little bit to the group, because I was thinking it could be an interesting thing to actually maybe do another session for those that are interested, and it can also work in a smaller group to actually go through some of the work that reconnects that is described by Joanna Macy, and I would be very interested in that. And maybe if you could just kind of introduce it just really briefly, so that everyone can hear what that's about.
Yeah, great, thank you. So the work that reconnects is Joanna Macy's creation, and basically it's a process. It's a 4-part process. So, and it's very much involved with this idea of ecological grief. So, the first stage that you go into is a gratitude stage. So it's about acknowledging, you know, all of the beauty and the wonder and you know, etc. And kind of opening up the connection, but in a way of appreciation and in a way that feeds your soul, kind of thing. So what you're actually doing in that first stage is that you are resourcing yourself for the second stage, which is honouring our pain for the world, which is this grief. And so what usually happens in that second section is it's almost a ritual space where a circle is set up, and there are some parameters, and the idea is that people can be in that space and connect to and release all of their distress and pain and anger and sadness and all of that, but it's in a very contained space. So it's a safe way to do it, as opposed to someone just sitting by themselves and drinking a bottle of whiskey and, you know, crying their eyes out and having no support. So it's a purging process, really. And then there is the seeing with new eyes. So it's once you have moved through the blockages that we all have, where we cut ourselves off from our pain. Once you've moved through the blockages and acknowledged your connection, how differently do you see the world, and how differently do you see your place in the world? So that's the section called Seeing with New Eyes. And then the last section is about going forth. So it's like, okay, now that I've gained this wisdom and this support, what now? What's my mission? How am I going to? So the idea, it's a transformative process, and it's usually takes at least a full day to do that with a collection of people, and it's quite a powerful, deep process. Yeah. The work that reconnects, yes. Yes. So someone wrote, yes, we have grief, but not about nature wanting to have bushfires and earthquakes. Is that not nature? That's a very interesting question. But I mean, yes, of course, like those destructive forces are part of nature. They're part of the, that complex field, just like a lion killing and eating an antelope is part of it too. So there's destruction. Often the destruction that nature sort of does by itself, like a bushfire, can be a regenerative process in itself of burning away the old, and the ash and the minerals released by that fire are feeding the soil to create, you know, the new plants and things like that. So there's always destruction and pain and suffering in nature, just as there is in all of life. So it's 8:30. I'm just wondering where everyone's at and if people have sort of had enough, or I'll put it back to Sel. Have you got anything you want to say to close us off, or?
Not really, actually. I might pass to Joel, actually, for the last bit. He's the host of this and has a better idea, I think, of what we're going to do. But thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, and it's been very educational and great to sort of have words to describe, I guess, what we're feeling, what we naturally feel as permaculturists, and given the year that we've had or even just the last 6 months with bushfires and floods, drought, and then coronavirus, and sort of watching a lot of the natural world, even small things like earlier on in the chat, people commented that it was like the air was sweeter, or they can hear more birds now because people have reduced the amount of I guess, imposition on the world around us, and that's making a difference to the natural world now. So yeah, I'll hand over to Joel. I think we have, he joked earlier, I think that we can all get our cups of tea and sit around and chat to each other as a big mass Zoom meeting. So I don't know whether that's still in the plan, Joel?
Yeah, we can give it a go. I think it does. I've just turned off the spotlight video so that there's nobody being holding the whole video space to themselves. So
suggest gallery view.
Yeah, click on in the top right. If you click between speaker view and gallery view, and if you're still hanging around in a couple of minutes, I'm going to unmute everybody, and we'll see what happens and see if we can have a post meeting discussion dialogue with our tea and maybe our caramel slice, depending on how prepared we've been.
Cecilia's asked if you're going to stop recording, so those of us who don't feel comfortable being recorded can.
I'm going to stop the recording now. So